off this session of the Safety View, and we've got Lisa doing the session today, leading us through.
All right, first I would love to see or hear who's actually on with us tomorrow. Do you have a sense of that, or can they be woven in?
Yeah, why don't we do a round robin?
All right, great. Okay, I'll kick off and then we'll have the others introduce. Hello all, I'm Lisa Landy. I currently reside in the Netherlands. I'm a US citizen, and it's given me a unique global perspective of what's going on these days. I will be discussing how safety and unsafety, if you will, become so interlinked and how they might even be necessary. And that will be kind of the basis of this conversation. I'll quickly say I'm a psychologist, both clinical and industrial organizational. All right, let me just turn it over. If people could say their names and where they are currently and what their expertise in one sentence is, that would be great.
Okay, my name is Rosa Carrillo, and I'm one of the hosts of The View. Enjoyed working with Lisa and Tamara, and I have a consulting practice in leadership and high performance team development. And I'd pass it over. Next.
System safety engineer for about 45 years, maybe even 50. And author, lecturer, taught system safety engineering at the University of Maryland for about 14 years. Basically did everything you could probably think about concerning safety since about 69.
Where are you now, Mike? Where do you live?
I am in, obviously, US. I am in South Carolina.
Thanks.
In Del Webb, a nice retirement community, 50+ community. And a lot of people are pretty frustrated in the sense that we can't use the amenities. And I'm trying to keep people from killing each other. You know, going for donuts and sitting next to each other. I can't keep them separated. And
Mike, hold that thought. Let's let the others introduce and we'll come back to that. It factors in greatly.
Bill Nelson in Houston, Texas, recently retired from DNV-GL. I'm a nuclear engineer by training. I spent 24 years at the Idaho National Laboratory, primarily working in human factors and risk management for nuclear and aerospace, and most recently offshore oil and gas.
Great, welcome. Gary, why don't you go next?
Morning, all. My name is Gary Wong. Right now, I'm in Vancouver, Canada. Basically, I'm an electrical engineer by trade, but mostly was in management consulting. I've actually kind of like repurposed myself. I'm into the complexity space now, so even my title has changed. I'm a complexity facilitator, and I am a Cynefin associate.
Great, welcome. Eric, you're next.
Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well today. My name's Eric. I'm located in Toronto, Ontario. I currently work at, excuse me, Velocity EH&S as a business development team lead, and I simply look to learn more about relationship building in organizations, creating a safe place psychologically, and just how to build effective relationships internally, generally. Just looking forward to hearing the conversation today. Thank you.
My name is Phillip Harris. I'm currently in Abu Dhabi. I've been in the nuclear industry for 43 years now, and the last 3 of those have been over here in Abu Dhabi. And I would say I'm probably a safety culture specialist.
Welcome. And Kailash, did I say your name right?
Yeah, you're right.
Thank you. Welcome. Please introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Kailash. Actually, I'm from the Indian Air Force. I served Indian Air Force for 25 years as an electrical engineer. And the last of my tenure, I was faculty from the electrical instrument there. And now from the last 5 years, I am working to develop the safety culture. Basically, I am trying to integrate the psychology in the safety culture for a mining industry. Presently, I am looking after the operations of CBRE and one particular state.
Welcome.
That's called the Rajasthan state, if you heard about it. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. And we do have a few people who are on telephone and have shared themselves in the chat. So we have Paul Daly from Ireland, and he's been in HSQE for the past 18 years, engineering and construction. We also have Stephen. He lives in Belgium, and he just graduated and wrote his paper on multicultural safety. So welcome. Lisa, why don't you take it away?
Thank you for bringing them both in, Tamara. We have 50 minutes of precious time, and I know we could talk 6 hours on this. Let me just give a bit about what motivated me to have this conversation now. It most definitely links to everything that's going on right now in our world. And when we talk about complexity, and I'm glad Gary's on board, so he can share a bit about this too. It just is an interesting reflection to make on how we have so much VUCA, which is the volatile, the ambiguous, the complex, and the unclear or unknown, all kind of interweaving. And I'm gonna, if I have freedom here, we'll lump that all into unsafety, the sense of just being uprooted. And how that sense of uprootedness has actually propelled us into a new stability, if you will, and how VUCA and this constant change is not something that's new to us, which is a lovely paradox that it itself is quite stable. And so, you know, we have the stability and the instability playing off each other all the time. So again, it's current events that have really made me aware of how much strength and power is coming out of what feels really tenuous and unsafe. So I thought it'd be great to pull together, you know, a diverse set of people and have this conversation. And I'm basically going to just turn it over to the floor, and whoever wants to chime in and get this started. I will ask that we try and really pull in a lot of voices here and do our best to not hold the camera as I am right now. So with that said, it's open.
Well, I guess we're experiencing a global system risk right now, in the sense that everything is connected and there's complexity associated with such connections. And I would like people to understand how to look at the big picture and understand all the elements of the complexity, the human, the machine, the environment, and all the interactions. And from my perspective, it is not as challenging as people might think. Maybe it's because I've been so close to doing this for so long. I just create adverse scenarios and I analyze these scenarios, and they could be any adverse sequences.
So let's stick with that, Mike. Are you implying either directly or indirectly that gaining experience or comfort with challenge can actually bring ease? Are you kind of making the case here?
Well, I have a very strange way of looking at things. Apparently, I'm fixated, probably because of doing this for so long. I have a tendency of seeing connections, and very easily. I see pictures and I see adverse sequences. And we're sitting in a consequence of that, this global system risk, And we don't seem to be approaching or managing this risk appropriately because we are disjointed. We are all segregated in our thoughts. And we have a hard time climbing out of our boxes. I didn't want to take over this conversation, but
No, that's great.
my perspective.
So it's very difficult. You know, we're all getting used to having these conversations online. If we were all in the room together, we would see nonverbal. So anyone else on there kind of want to pick up and move with that?
Well, I would like to make a comment, Michael. I think that's a very insightful comment that you made. The culture of the United States, when you look at Hofstede and Trumpenor, is the most individualistic of any country in the world. I think except Czechoslovakia, the last time I looked. But I think that that it's in the very DNA of the culture that you can't tell me what to do. So that goes to the issue of, you know, how do we take culture into account when we're trying to work these scenarios and implement processes or solutions.
It takes a lot of discussion. And I might just do that instinctively over time, but you actually have to spend a lot of time with people almost on a one-to-one concept and win people over. And I mean, you ladies have talked about it, trust, transparency, you know, things like team building, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
There are human factor considerations in team building, which I do appreciate. And I just basically do this instinctively. I have a tendency of seeking feedback real time and read cues from people. And I try to respond to these cues. I don't know, maybe it's lecturing for 14 years or whatever. It's all instinctive. And I'm motivated to sell this concept. And I've been in cultures that were pretty, how can I say it? Pretty static and pretty political and not easy to change. And I did have some success and some failure.
So now we're confronted with a situation where our tried and truths are not necessarily beneficial to go to as our go-tos. It's requiring an ability to be more adaptive than maybe our organizations and even society and various cultures have evolved to be. And Gary, I know I'm probably putting you on the spot here, but I'm wondering selfishly, you know, as much as you delve into the complexity piece of this and how it relates to cultural evolution and human evolution, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, thanks. Philip, I saw your hand waving, so if you want to come after me, please do that.
I'm
So
sorry, thank you.
Yeah, what's been happening is that I think we've been living kind of in an order world. So one of the things that we look at is that there are three basic systems that make up the real world. There's an order system, and Mike's scenarios fit in that really well, cause and effect stuff. Then we have this thing called the complex system, which we're really still trying to learn about. And we have the chaos system here. So I think what's happening is that when we look at the order system, like scenarios, for example, here, when I did Peter Schwartz's stuff, The Art of the Long View, you would take your, what we call the known knowns, and you would project them out into this cone of plausibility. Then you can create some scenarios and you can do some what-ifing around that. What we're facing today, though, are unknown unknowns, unknowables, unimaginables. And the thing is that they're not coming one at a time sequentially. We get hit with a pandemic. It's called coronavirus. Well, what does that do? It actually causes a rupture of another pandemic called social injustice. And I'm really concerned about where you live, Mike, down south. You're going to get another catastrophe coming, and it's called extreme weather, hurricanes. I just don't know what these three come together is going to produce, because they're all novel here. We don't have the time, unfortunately, to sit down and talk to each other one-on-one to figure things out here. So the kind of like the process or methodology we're trying to do in the complex space is, you just got to get out there and just do some experimenting, try things out here. And we're actually seeing that now as we're trying to find a vaccine for the coronavirus here. Nobody knows if we're ever going to get one here. So you have like 170 people trying things out here. You whittle them down to maybe 13 to try them on humans here. But there's still no guarantee that we're actually going to have a vaccine. But meanwhile, life carries on. We still have to somehow stabilize and do other stuff, flatten the curve, social distancing, all these things here, on the hope that we will get a vaccine. Philip, you had something to say?
Well, I'm not intimidated by synergistic risks. I understand synergistic risks.
Hold on one second. I think Philip was going to speak. I'm sorry to cut you off.
Turn your mic on. Philip, turn your microphone on.
Yeah, so I was going to respond to something, and I'm not quite sure who said it now. Talking about,
Mike Alito.
I think Rosa said about the Hofstede and the American culture being the very individualistic. I'm sat in a very different place here in Abu Dhabi. I think there are many different factors. I think wealth is probably one of the factors that has caused less concern here. We're in a situation, we have a population of about 10.5 million people, and I think it's something like about 40% of the population have been tested now. The isolation, all regions have been isolated, so you've been unable to travel between regions. So did the people kick up about it? No, they didn't, because culturally it's all about being together, and this is for the good of the community. And that's probably for me the major difference that I've recognized. I'm working in a multicultural organization, 60, 70 different nationalities. So it's something that is quite common. It's not uncommon, put it that way.
And so what have you taken away from that learning that is assisting you here? I think I missed that, Philip. Excuse me.
So I think for me, the way that the different countries have reacted to this pandemic in particular have been cultural and finance, I would probably say, are the biggest impacts. The way that the nation has dealt with it. Now, I'm obviously I'm from the UK, so I'm very, I follow what's happening there, and what's happening there is very similar to what's happening in the States. We also on Hofstede scale are very individualistic, and that has an impact upon the way that we as a community or as groups deal with situations like this.
So if we were looking at what is leading some of our countries to better adapt under this complex environment we're finding ourselves, would one of those characteristics be the individual versus the collective approach? Or I don't know, other thoughts?
Anyone else?
The world is getting smaller via social media, via movies. You see graffiti that originated in Brooklyn, in Europe. I think the world is getting smaller. I think we are becoming more consistent in the way we communicate. We see this on LinkedIn. We all come from different backgrounds and different perspectives. I think there's a mutual respect. There's a mutual banter, and good discussions. So I don't know. 30 years ago, I was on a space station and went all over the world, and we were talking about complex risks and how we communicate around the table with everybody. And it just took a while. It took a while for us to communicate, to build our trust, to understand each other. I think the interaction, the interfaces, the communication, all of that helps. And we were able to integrate an international entity fairly successfully. So,
and Michael, if I was to ask you in that experience, what do you think was a key role to helping get people to collaborate and build that relationship and trust? Bringing such a diverse group together in an unusual circumstance.
Well, we eventually socialized. We went out to dinner together. I love the coffee breaks. and we started to enjoy each other. Now, my background is European. Brooklyn kid, but coming from a big city, we kept our ethnicity. We are very close to Europe. So I was well accepted, frankly, compared to the guys from Houston with cowboy boots. They would actually respond to me rather than respond to the NASA chief guy, because he had sideburns and, cowboy boots.
Could I add an observation here? Because I would love to know what you all think. By the way, you need to raise your hand so that we know you want to make a comment, okay? I have met people like Michael in my career that seem to have this ability. It's very hard to teach it, very hard to teach it, but I know that you have all worked with leaders who go into a very chaotic, distressful situation and work with the team, create the team, and bring everyone into alignment so that it becomes a high performance site or team. And in my observation, this is always around the leadership of that particular person, the personality of that particular person. So I would like to know from some of you others, if you have had, Bill, I know you've worked in nuclear for a long time. What's been your experience in terms of the difference in performance and the way people communicate and the trust levels? Do you think it's based on individual leadership, or do you think there's other factors?
Well, individual leadership obviously plays a significant role. And I've had the pleasure, because of my career, of working across industries, nuclear and defense and aerospace and oil and gas. And definitely the tone and character of the leadership makes a big difference. And I'm interested in Mike's comment about the guys from Houston in the cowboy boots. I've spent a lot of time working for NASA here in Houston. And maybe it's because it's being at the center itself, Mike, but those guys in cowboy boots, in my experience, were nothing but open-minded and accepting, and very little of the cowboy mentality of I know better than everybody else. So
well, this was
the second point. So So I think
Let
the
Bill,
key
let
is-
Bill, may I make an intervention? I'm sorry, it's the facilitator and me. But this discussion is not with Michael, okay? So Michael, please don't feel like you have to respond to every comment, because we're here to listen and learn from each other. So Bill, please finish your thoughts. And I encourage other people to add to it or disagree, whichever, because we're here to just not necessarily take an expert's point of view, but to bring out the expertise in each one of us, okay?
Yeah.
So
Thanks,
Bill,
Rosa.
please finish your sentence.
Thanks, Rosa. I shouldn't have specifically referred to Michael's comment, but my experience is it really depends on the openness of the individual leaders and their willingness to listen to different points of view rather than saying, I've got this all figured out.
You know, one of the comments that we had gotten in advance of this episode, if you will, was from John Green, and he was responding to you, I think, Rosa. He wondered how us managing now in a crisis, and I'm kind of grouping managing and leading together here, how it's any different than the complexity, if you will, that we deal with every day prior to a crisis. And I'm curious if those same characteristics that we're talking about as leaders, when you think of those effective leaders, you know, have they changed? Do they need to change? Is there anything different?
Yeah, I think, Lisa, I want to turn it over to everyone, but, and Tamara wants to say something, but John Green, yeah, he was saying that he doesn't see any difference between the two, right? Tamara?
That's right. And I'm curious if others feel that way.
Yeah, Tamara?
See, and I'd be interested in how much it is upon the perception of the person delivering it also that gets a different response from the people, because I have had experiences where I can watch in a room. Well, the leader will be very have open listening and really engaged with some people in the room, and then when other people in the room are speaking, there isn't the same amount of respect. So I think it also goes towards, why do we change our demeanor and level of respect towards different people? What are people's thoughts on that?
Would you ask that again, Tamara? Oh, I saw Gary raising his hand. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. People are thinking about what I said because it's pretty profound.
Yeah.
It is the elephant in the room, really.
I think it all depends on context, what the situation is. So if you have a situation where you're just looking for something that's innovative, you know, something that's new, but there's not a lot of time pressure, there's resources to be allocated, and you're willing to take a perspective, you can take your time, you can explore, you can experiment, and have a good time learning as you go along here. And then hopefully something will emerge. In a crisis, it's a different context. So you're under huge time pressure to kind of escape chaos, stabilize here. Resources are all over the place, in many cases here. And typically what I find managers and leaders, we all look up and say, what are you going to do? And the poor guy goes, I don't even have any answer. I didn't have the right questions here. But they feel compelled because that's what we teach in schools, that leaders lead. So we expect them to do something. And so they kind of take the perspective they've got, which has been honed after years and years of experience, and they just follow their own heuristics and say, we're going to go that way, right or wrong. And everybody jumps behind that because it looks like that person is leading. But hell's bells, we may all be going over a cliff because it could be a blind path into a fog. We just don't know what's going there. So I think it takes great guts for a leader to kind of go like, I am not going to do that. I cannot do it by myself. I need everyone around me to engage me. And we're going to have to do this step by step, kind of like evolve in the present here. because it's foggy out there. We just don't know where the next step is going to be.
Gary, I'm struggling with this piece of it because this is, am I cutting anyone off? Because I cannot see who has their hand raised. Am I cutting anyone off?
Well, of course, my
Okay,
hand is raised.
Well, I just want to say this, please, in response to Gary. It does seem that we are in need of a different leader, and that leader is each of us. I think the time has come where we have to move from the individual leader to a collective leadership. And I believe that part of our inability or difficulty becoming adaptive in response to the crises we've been faced with is because we keep relegating that responsibility to the few as opposed to the many. And that is the beautiful thing, and hence the motivation for this discussion. This crisis, this VUCA, this upset, this real unknown has stimulated the individual leader within each of us to become collective in a collective movement, saying we want equity amongst each other. And I think that's a beautiful thing that's requiring a different leadership moving forward. So that's my piece. Other thoughts on that? Just jump in.
Bill Nelson.
Mike has thoughts
Bill
on
Nelson.
everything, so Mike's not going to say anything.
Bill Nelson.
All right. Lisa, I think your VUCA concept, which I'm unfamiliar with till now, is a big part of this because there is so much uncertainty in what's going on. And yet there are individuals and leaders who are pretending to have, you know, the absolute knowledge of things that are very, very uncertain. There's so much scientific uncertainty as well as all the social uncertainties that go with it, that for anyone to have the corner on understanding the situation is at least inadequate.
Thank you, Bill. I really have that sense too. Other thoughts about that?
The health professionals should provide the leadership. The politicians should not provide the leadership.
Who's a health professional? I'm a health professional. My mom's a health professional. Who isn't a health professional is my question. Who do you mean by health professional, Mike? Who are you speaking about?
People that have knowledge about epidemiology, people that have knowledge of this particular risk.
Expert.
It would be helpful for integrated concepts. It would be helpful that the world would get together with its health professionals. And I know they're trying with the World Health Organization and et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of sad. I'm looking for guidance from a group of professionals that actually understand what they're talking about. I'm looking for consistent treatment options from local medical professionals, where maybe we could have a choice of our treatment options. I'm looking for some integration instinctively to solve this problem. And I can't listen to politicians.
You know what you're bringing up, I'm going to link it back to Gary's discrimination of boxes of order, complexity, and chaos. Yeah. And you know, maybe these boxes blend. Maybe we need the order that you're speaking to in respecting expertise, even though they're confronted with unknowns now too, as I think we all know from watching the news. And we also need those, which is everyone who's dealing with complexity, and making sure those voices are heard. Could it be both? And Kailash, I'm wondering if you have something you'd like to say.
Yeah. Actually, I want to just add to the Michael's point of view that it should be left to the professional who knows something about this. my point of view is, do anybody claim in this particular situation that he knows something? Because as per me, this is a complete uncertainty. Though some health professionals, yes, you can say they can guide them, except that all other aspects, like financially, professionally, on every aspect, there's a complete uncertainty, and nobody can claim to be who is having at the top of this uncertainty. So the leaders has to come within us. That there may not be any hierarchy on this. That may be from the bottom side, but the people who have more resilient way of working, or who have more resilience, who can have more motivation, so that the people around him is motivated and able to take up that challenge. That will add to the value, I think.
Kailesh, you had sent in a question in advance, and I wonder if this isn't a time you could expand on it a bit. You had asked about the views of psycho-behavioral elements and its impact on safety. I'm curious if you would share what you think about those aspects and safety.
Sure, Lida. Actually, this is basically the integration. If you see the behavioral modification methods, and if you see the behavioral based safety, so we talk about different enforcements and all this stuff, but do we really know measures the actual what is going on in the brain of the worker? And if we know, if we can observe something, if we can observe the actual behaviors of, say, suppose of not 100%, say suppose 80% or 70% of our workforce, then we can devise that particular psychological tools which we can use to modify that basically. This is basically what was my idea. Actually, what I have done at one of the site, I've divided these guys into two different categories. One is there are some people who commits the unsafe acts, even intentionally also to have some shortcuts or so that they're getting it very early. The task is completed very early. And some people are there where they have something which is not there, they don't know actually. So to make them in two groups and to measure the psychological effect, the reason behind this unsafe acts, and then modify as per the psychological tools, like we teach in the schools with the boys and girls, or the students. We have this thing, slow learners and all this stuff we really use. So that things, if we can use here, integrate with the industry, so that will be a added advantage. This was my point. Basically, I want to put forth that.
So basically, you're seeing how their psychological makeup impacts safety.
Yes.
And whether it's positive or negative, and the emotional space, does that also impact their creation of safety, or their response to feeling unsafe?
Yes, their response to their enforcements, and if we find something where we want to add something, or we want to just observe and give some reinforcement in terms of positive, negative, or punishment, or whatever the method, that we can add on this. This was the point.
And of course, that impacts safety.
Yeah.
In the negative.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Interesting.
I would like to highlight sort of a paradox that I overheard here. I'm Cade, by the way, didn't get a chance to introduce myself here, but I have an interesting perspective in that I've lived in both Canada and the US. And to highlight sort of the paradox in the US is, yes, we want the choice, but we also want to listen to the professionals. However, in the US, our health is very much determined by people who are not experts. For instance, if a doctor prescribes me a medication and it's not covered by my insurance, who has not the medical training that my doctor has, will say I need to be prescribed a lesser drug or a less effective drug or the drug that's not the best on the market. And so here you can see in the US very apparently when you put any sort of stress on this complex system of our insurance companies and our politicians, when we're not listening to our doctors, the ones with the expertise, what sort of catastrophe has happened here? So I think it's interesting that we both at one time want the choice to be protected and have the choice to seek our own medical choices. However, we also want the medical professionals to be able to voice their expertise. We've basically have made our medical professionals basically tied their hands here. They know what to do. They know, but we can't listen to them. We have to listen to the insurance companies here.
Yeah.
That's sort of the paradox. Yes, that's the paradox that I've seen here.
You actually brought up, Gary, go ahead, please.
I saw Phillip and then Tamara raise their hands.
Thanks, Rosa.
Mm-hmm. Phillip? Nope, he changed his mind. Tamara?
Yeah, I want to bring in our social conditioning into this discussion, because we have been socially conditioned for decades to allow, this concept of who should be in power repeatedly. So it's not a wonder that now in the modern world, we keep falling back into our historical structure of how power should be delegated, right? It's always been a very small group of people who have made the decisions for the collective. And now we're trying to bring it around so that we're going to engage the employees. We're going to bring people into the conversation. We're going to do all this, but we're neglecting to break open the fact that historically it's never been allowed. And now you've got employees who are afraid of speaking up because we have been put in our mindset that if you speak up, you are a subordinate, you're being subordinate. And it's nice in a theoretical realm to say, oh, isn't it just nice if the employee is empowered? But working in the grocery store, where that industrial mindset of you're the employee, so be quiet, do your work, I'm going to tell you what to do. And they even say to people, you're not paid to think. So I'm going to put that out there, right? Because I think that's a piece of the conversation that we have to really crack open. And it's part of the elephant in the room, right?
It's huge, Tamara.
Sorry,
like we're trying to give power to people that are disempowered.
Who was going to speak?
That was, sorry, Matthew Gonzalez. So I'm from South Africa, which if you know a little bit about our country, we've had a long history of this power divide, I would say, yes. With our laws, apartheid, etc. And I think, so we as sort of culturally are in quite an interesting space at the moment. We have a lot of our sort of 40 plus manager type people have been raised and we're in a system where that sort of thinking was apparent, where you were told this is what you need to do and you followed it without question. And now we have filtering into our workspace, what we call in South Africa, the born freeze. So those born after we gained democracy in South Africa in 1994, they are starting to filter into our workforce. And it's this weird and very strange and sometimes conflicting culture sort of battle happening within our organizations, never mind as our society as a whole, because they question more. They don't readily accept that the word from the higher authority is true. And it is very difficult. And I think a lot of managers within South Africa at the moment are struggling with that. Whereas our young people are becoming a larger voice within our society. Yes. So it's something that needs to be answered. How do we deal with this? How do we move forward with it? How do we manage it all that is effective and productive for society? And unfortunately, I don't think I have a clear answer.
Yeah. You
And
know,
I'd
Matthew,
like,
that is,
I'd
go ahead,
actually like,
Tamara.
I'd like to build on this, right? Because as a parent, you know, I'm finding it very interesting. I have a teenage son right now, just to give you an example of a generational clash. Is like when I was growing up and my parents asked me to do something, we just did it, right? But when I'm asking my son to do something and in his mind he's decided that he doesn't want to do it, there'll be this conflict that comes out, which of course doesn't occur in the workplace, but clearly it's occurring. And the thing that he comes back to me with is, why does your generation always think we don't have the right to an opinion and we don't have the right to speak up? And I'm like thinking, whoa, wait a minute here. Because Generation X, we tout ourselves on trying to get people collaborative, trying to engage people, right? But is it possible that the way we're communicating that is not coming through to the other generations, even though in our head we think we're being collaborative, etc.?
I think what we're just seeing is that we're just seeing normal cycles of generational swings, and it's always a pendulum swing. That's 25 years. So you go back into you get the gay 90s, and that's followed by Victorian age. Then you get the roaring 20s. Then you get, so I was in the boomer age here. So we were actually, you know, we did what we were told and all that sort of stuff here. And I'm going like, I don't want my kids to grow up like I'm, so you give them more freedom. And they go this way, and they go like, I don't want my kids to go this way, so they go back this way here. So we seem to be going through these swings here. I would say right now, with the youngsters who are actually very well equipped with smart devices and everything else, and all these new social media apps. I'm still on Facebook, and my nieces and nephews are off that. They're on to Snapchat and everything else here. So I've lost communication with them. But I think that is the generation, and we're seeing it. Who's out in the streets doing the protesting and all this sort of stuff here? I'm behind them, but I'm not out there in the streets with them because they actually have the moxie and the courage to be out there.
Yeah, it is evolutionary and it is generational, and it does have this kind of reaction, counter reaction impact on the future generations. It's really fascinating. But I want to go back to Matthew's perspective here a bit ago. And Matthew, I imagine South Africa is once again in for some wonderful conflict. And I say wonderful conflict because I think change comes from conflict. And maybe it's time that, you know, the power base is challenged. And maybe the timing is appropriate for that challenge. Are you still on? Will you respond?
Yes, I'm still here. Yeah, I mean, it's quite difficult. I am a millennial, so when we went into democracy, I think I was 8 years old. Didn't really understand what the previous era was all about, but have always lived with the histories of it, the past, you know, coming back to us, see the implications long-term of it, and have been really privileged enough to actually see how we've tried to change and how we've tried to address all of these things. And South Africans as a whole, I think, have got things right. We've also got things wrong. And we've admitted to getting those things wrong. And I think that's the big thing. I think if South Africa didn't have the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we would have gone somewhere totally different. And that was really, just to bring it back to safety, really a restorative just culture process within South Africa after we moved into democracy. And it's something that every South African who ever saw it or was involved in it, it sticks in our minds continuously and will never go away. And that's the power of a restorative just culture in action.
Right.
So I've heard a lot of people who don't really believe about it, believe it will work in an organization, and my country's living proof that it works even on that grander scale. Making it work for an organization is actually easier. But yes, obviously we were in a time of change, of conflict, of disruption. And COVID-19 has shone a light on some of the inequalities within our system, in our nation. And I think across the world, they're experiencing the same thing. I think in the United States, with the Black Lives Matter protests, that was one of the things that was shone on. South Africa, we have a different set of problems, which I'm sure Paul, if I believe in Abu Dhabi, there's his set of problems that he sees. In the UK, they have their own different set of problems. We all have slightly different problems, but I think this time of disruption is a time for us to reset and to really say, okay, well, the world sort of switched off for a couple of months here. That's a bad thing, but it's also a good thing. And maybe we can use that now to our advantage and say, okay, well, you know, there was things that we maybe wanted to change and maybe to put in place and all these things. Now's the time that we can. Now's the time we can look at those complex systems and really starting to delve into them, because we actually afforded a little bit of time at the same time as us having time taken away from us. It's a strange paradoxical situation that we find ourselves in.
Well, and this is a great time. I'm going to take it back now to close out and just share a few closing thoughts. And Matthew, you brought it back full circle beautifully. The first thing I'd like to say is I think we as humans have had a very difficult time holding two competing thoughts in mind as unified. And I think we struggle with that unity because binary elements have an attraction, right? They allow us to compartmentalize. It makes us feel safe. We can do bad, good, black, white, poor, rich easily. It gives us a clear distinction. And we're at a time where we need some unity and some comfort with unity. So it's powerful to recognize just how instructive all these VUCA, the volatile, the unknown, the complex, and the adverse experiences like COVID, and the not unrelated protests that uncover a very long history, going back to Tamara's point, of conferring superior and inferior status in the world, whether that is amongst and between humans, or even human superiority or believing they're superior over nature. And, you know, this desire to control as opposed to flow. And I believe we're at a time where we can recognize that painful and unhealthy need healthy, and ugly and beautiful are found in every aspect of society. And life endangering is also found in death defying. I think we have to be okay with those competing thoughts. VUCA is a gift to us. It's propelling us forward, meaning, and VUCA being synonymous here for me as unsafety, if you will. I think the ambiguous is paradoxically stable over time. The VUCA is stable over time. And the only thing that has changed for us, as I said before, are the circumstances we're dealing with. Somebody who's not on the call but had sent in and said, Lisa, you really need to add T to VUCA. And he had shared Van Stralen and Crew's research on the need to add threatening to VUCA. I do believe we need a T, but I don't think that T represents threat, because other research by Vorbe and his associates have found that some of us respond to VUCA very well, and it's actually motivating and propelling. And that begged in my mind to wonder, what are those attributes of individuals who see, VUCA as something that's encouraging? And I think if I reflect as a psychologist on the need for leadership, it's the number one criteria is individuals who can be adaptive and responsive and encouraged by VUCA in order to create this new world order, or maybe I should say new world complexity. And this ability to flow with the change and seek to understand it before moving to our old way of needing to control it. That requires awareness. It requires humility. It requires an inner sense of security. And so how do we enable that within each of us so we're each acting as leaders, and that will lead us to a collective leadership. We're getting closer to collective leadership. So I'm just going to end by saying that we're getting closer to that world that we embrace VUCA as opposed to repel or need to control it. And we're therefore closer to being a more humble collective, that we can coexist with others and the planet. And maybe we're on the path to sustainable growth and development, and we can actually realize the agenda for sustainable development by 2030. So with that, I'm going to say thank you to all for this conversation. And I hope we can continue to have more thoughtful conversations like this in the future. Any last thoughts, or Tamara, do you want to close out?
Well, I'll give the floor to anybody with last thoughts. Just raise your hand and take the floor. Rosa and Eric.
Eric, go ahead first.
Excuse me. Just with regards to adaptability, I was watching another video on, I think it was at China, I can't recall, but he was explaining a new open heart surgery being conducted. There are two groups. The first group failed. The first group grabbed a team of experts, highly professional, highly qualified. They didn't succeed. The second group had a lead surgeon come along, I think, and he had a very human approach. He wanted to be called by his first name. He had team building events, etc. And they succeeded, and they did this very complex surgery. And I, just to Michael's point, when Michael was talking, for whatever reason, this popped in my head because it was such a simple thing to include people. And similar to Nobel Prize winners doing kind of random activities to jog their brain, like balloon tying and all this stuff. It's the benefit of having people in a community that may not be there in somebody else's eyes, is their ability to jog your mind and offer like a pattern interruption. So you start thinking differently and change your rhythm. And that with inclusion, I think adds a good recipe for great ideas to come from my experience too on my own different endeavors. So I just thought that was really neat. Michael, thank you for talking about team building there.
Eric, thank you. Rosa.
No, I think on that note, we're pretty complete.
Tamara, do you want to close this out, please?
Thank you, everybody, for joining us on the Safety View. I think that was a really great conversation. We went into a lot of different areas, and I really enjoyed that, when we can have a safe place to really have open conversation. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So great. Thank you all.